Well, the Shadow Equalities Secretary, Anneliese Dodds, joins us. Good to have you here in the studio. Thanks for coming in. Let's talk migration, shall we? Because it's clearly a big election issue. We've seen, of course, record levels of net migration in recent years. Your party doesn't have a specific target on migration. Why not?
Because what we need is a clear plan. We've seen targets actually under the Conservatives. They've not delivered the change that's necessary. We need to have a clear plan, both in relation to the small boats. Keir Starmer obviously is right. We cannot continue with this situation where criminal gangs are operating with impunity. Labour set out that plan to stop those criminal gangs, to stop that vile trade. But we also need to have a clear plan on, of course, migration for work, where we've seen such a huge rise under the Conservatives, again with no plan, but Labour has a plan to ensure that we can deal with that too.
It's interesting you say you don't think you need targets because the Conservatives have targets and they didn't work. So is that what you're essentially saying? You don't want to put a number on it because you don't think you'll be able to meet it?
The Conservatives' approach very obviously has not worked. But both in terms
my
of...
point is, is that really a great reason to not have a target? Because, oh, yeah, we might not meet it.
We want to ensure that we see net migration coming down. The reason why it's been going up over recent years is because of that lack of a plan, and particularly because of the issue of increased numbers of people coming in for work. Now, if you look at health and social care visas, for example, you've seen an increase in them of about 150%. Why has that happened? It's happened because the government has not had a workforce strategy for health and social care. It hasn't been training up the domestic workforce. You've seen in health and social care and in other areas unscrupulous employers who's been undercutting the workforce, the domestic workforce, by hiring people from overseas on lower wages and with worse terms and conditions. Labour's not just going to sit back on this. We're going to take action because that's what the people of our country deserve.
You say you've got a plan, you say you're going to take action. I have to say I was really struck by the polling today, right? The Sky News YouGov polling. And I should say this is not just directed at Labour, it's the Conservatives as well. But it just shows that people just don't believe you. They just don't believe you. They don't believe, firstly, that you're telling the truth about what you really think about immigration. And they also don't believe that you're going to get immigration down if you win the election either. And you can see why, right?
Well, I can see why people are cynical about the power of politics, because over the last few years, they've had so many promises that have been made by the government of the day. They've seen so many sound bites. I think it's a challenge for all politicians. That's why Labour's determined to turn our country around, to be really upfront with people about where there are challenges, about the fact that, for example, we will always see where the money is coming from. Obviously, something, again, the Conservatives are not doing with their manifesto, but which Labour would do. And we're determined to change that.
We've spoken a lot about the Conservatives. Let's talk about Labour. You're here to talk about your plan to revive British pubs. So are you going to extend the beer duty-frees then? That might help a bit.
Well, really, what seems to make the biggest difference for pubs is whether they're able to stay as pubs. That's what I've heard from publicans up and down the country, that they're finding it really difficult to ensure that if the property developers, for example, start circling around a particular pub, that they're able to actually maintain it as a pub. In theory, currently, there are powers for communities to be able to make those pubs into community assets, but it's far too difficult for communities to be able to do that. That's what Labour's talking about today. Let's make sure that communities are unleashed so that they can actually deliver those pubs that are needed, pubs that should be hubs for communities.
Are you a pub fan yourself? Are you a kind of pub goer? What's your...
I do like going to the pub. I think, like many people, well, I like real ale, you see.
And it's never... pub fan, fair enough.
Yes, it's never better than actually inside a pub, I've got to say, especially when you can have the fresh beer. And that's been a great thing that we've seen in our country, has been the growth of smaller brewers as well. Very exciting. So really, we should be doing all we can to support them, but also the pub is the hub, as the community centre. That's what Labour would do.
If Labour do win, as the poll suggests they will, Rachel Reeves today suggested that, you'd have to hit the ground running. So what does that mean? Does that mean a fiscal event before the summer, perhaps?
Well, that means having a clear plan about how we're going to deliver that change. Of course.
Come on. Let's engage with the question. What does that mean? A fiscal event before the summer?
Well, I'm going to have to say something before I answer that question, which is that barely any votes are being cast. I mean, postal votes are only just starting to land now, so still lots of people who don't know. We're getting up and down the country to have that conversation with them. If we are given that chance to serve, the very first thing that we will do for our economy is that first economic step that Keir and Rachel set out before the general election was even called. That's around making sure we have the fiscal lock in place that Labour said is so critical for ensuring stability, that our fiscal rules would also be put in place as well, because economic stability is fundamental for us turning our country around and delivering the measures within our manifesto. So that would be the first thing we do.
No hint on when that fiscal event might be?
Well, I'm sure Rachel will be thinking this through very carefully, but that first step is going to be about re-establishing economic stability, so important after the instability that we've seen over recent years.
OK, Anneliese Dodds, thank you very much indeed. Anneliese Dodds,